Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to today's full licensing meeting, Thursday, the 9th of March 2023. So firstly, please, may I have apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just do the housekeeping and then
Oh, indeed,
apologies?
yes.
Thank you. So please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the website for a minimum of 6 months. For those in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point under the Brady Road flyover. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Please note this includes members' laptops. Please turn off laptop cameras and microphones and turn the volume all the way down to ensure no disruption or feedback. Thank you. Item 1, apologies have been received from Councillor Brian Dion, Councillor Mark Howell, Councillor Kieran Wilson and Councillor Dwayne Farr.
And also from Councillor Bagwell and Councillor Sarah Anderson. So Councillor Dwayne Farr and Kieran Wilson as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, item 2, Chair, substitute members, there are none today.
Thank you very much. So members, we move on to declarations of interest. If you have any declarations of interest, could you so indicate now, please? None? Okay, then we'll move on. Thank you. So item 4 is confirmation of minutes. So we confirm I have a tome of minutes to sign off, which I'll do later, but to confirm the following sets of minutes as an accurate record for the chair to sign, which I shall do. And we have licensing committee on the 8th of December and the 26th of January 2023. You'll have had access to these. And licensing subcommittees, which are subcommittees met. I thank members for their attendance and diligence on this. And that's the 24th of November. That's the 7th and 21st of December, the 18th of January and the 1st and 9th of February. So those members that attended those will have access to those. So can I take those, please, as an accurate record of the minutes? All agreed? Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 5, which is public issues. Do we have any public questions or items for this?
There are no formal public questions or statements, members of the Taxi and Private Hire Association.
Okay, so we have today, very welcome today, we have the following members of BCP Taxi and Private Hire Association, and you're all here. You're very welcome, gentlemen. We've got Mr. David Lane, we've got Mr. Monty Tabley, lovely, and Mr. Paul Sondheim, and good morning to you. So we move on to item 6, which is the provision of taxi ranks. The purpose of this report is to respond to a question raised by the taxi trade at a previous meeting of the committee about whether the level of provision and location of hackney carriage ranks was meeting current need. Subsequently, officers and members of the BCP taxi trade have worked together to undertake an audit of all the ranks, the results of which are set out in the report for the committee's consideration. So we have our officers attending with regard to advice. There's Mrs. Randall, who's our interim head of safety communities. We've got Trudy Barlow, who's our licensing officer, and we've got Mrs. Linda Cole sitting next to me, who's our legal advisor. So I'll ask Mrs. Randall, please, if she take us through the report. I'll ask Mrs. Barlow if she take us through the report. Thank you.
Right, okay, report. Good morning, everybody. The first report before you is regarding the taxi ranks, but as it says in the report, myself, my colleague Wesley Freeman, and members of the taxi trade, Mr. Peter Vass, Mr. Sondheim, who's here today, and Mr. David Lane, who's also here today, took the very laborious task of going around all the taxi ranks in Christchurch, Bournemouth and Poole. Do you want me to start again?
That's good. Yes, we couldn't quite hear you.
Okay. Good morning. The report for you is concerning the provision of taxi ranks in the BCP area. In August of last year, myself, my colleague Mr. Wesley Freeman, along with Mr. Sondheim, who's here today, and Mr. David Lane, and another member of taxi trade, Mr. Peter Vass, spent the whole day going around all the taxi ranks within the BCP area, noting them, marking them for signage, positioning, etc. We found various anomalies. Obviously, from the legacy authorities, ranks were painted differently, you know, signed differently. Some ranks have been moved due to various regeneration schemes. We went through them all, and we came up with a plan. We've now been in conversation with the highways, who are the predominant stakeholders for that particular area, and we are now doing on a sort of a small case by case basis of each rank, with a priority of the ranks that perhaps are more commonly used and more problematic. It did take quite a while for us to get hold of highways and get the right person, but now we have got the right person, and these works are underway, as I said, on a case by case basis. That's really what the report states.
Yes, indeed. Jane, of course, this is for, thank you, Toby. This is for information, of course, to advise us, because, of course, we're very much constricted by highways, because although we can point all these things out, it's very much a matter for them to put them in train. But it's something that we can feed up to them, and hopefully they'll react in the appropriate way. And of course, we will encourage them to do so. And it's very helpful to have had this opportunity to do that, gents, because obviously you're the eyes and ears of the trade. So very grateful to you for that. Thank you very much, Judy, for your report. Members, do we have any questions or points of fact you'd like to raise, or are you happy to just accept the report and that we move forward to ensure that highways are aware that these are pressing needs, pending needs, and to certainly take them into consideration when they're doing their development or whatever they do to the very best of their ability? Are we happy? Thank you very much to the members. We'll take that as... Oh, David, you're showing. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, there was a couple of comments when I read through this report. I just wanted to sort of raise, and I'm aware it's not sort of it's just for us to consider the contents and not actually sort of make policy or anything. It was interesting. My worry is the sort of dependence on the highways team, and it's interesting. The officers sort of said it's difficult to get hold of the right person in the highways department. I think we've probably all experienced that as ward councillors over time. And I sympathise with highways. You know, they're under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of demand on them, and this is probably just something extra. And I am concerned because this council's just approved a 10% cut in the highways maintenance budget for next year, about £300,000 cut. So, in light of the fact that our roads are needing more and more works and more potholes repairing, more and more maintenance, and this is something on top, in terms of the fact that they're probably reducing budget, probably reducing manpower, then, you know, what are the timescales for this to actually be delivered? You know, are we looking at a 10-year programme to deliver this, or are we looking at over the next 12 months? It's sort of, I'm afraid it's just a little vague. It just sort of says, well, this is down to highways and we'll hope that they do it. You know, I'd rather something a bit more structured, some deadlines, some milestones. Let's see, is it a 3-year programme, or which ones are they going to prioritise? So I don't know if there's any comments on that.
Well, I think Councillor Brown, I think there isn't one person sitting in this room who wouldn't wish for that to be the process, but regrettably it's not. The process is its responsibility of highways. Whether that can change, or whether there is any ability for that to change with regard to statute or local agreements, I think that's a matter for the next administration. It's certainly not something that I would put in train now. I don't think I even have the ability to do that. So I think we are rather where we are. Highways have that responsibility, but of course as an authority, as a licensing authority, just as in planning, we can raise these matters and take them to highways where they will have due cognizance, and one would hope that they would be listening to our taxi trade to take these matters forward to the best of their ability. Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps then we might suggest that, having with the ranks that have been looked at here, that we have a look at them in 6 months' time to see what progress highways have made. Not suggesting another survey, because I appreciate that will take a great deal of time,
Yes, we could ask
but perhaps just looking at the ones that have already been surveyed to see if there's been any progress made in 6 months' time.
Would you like to second that, Councillor Brown? Would you like to second that proposal to bring it forward in 6 months' time to bring a report forward to see what updates we have, to see what progress has been made?
I think that'd be useful actually. I'd like to make a slightly different recommendation actually, if we could.
Okay, we have one on the table.
Okay.
So do we have a seconder for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. So with regard to the proposal that we ask, is capable of bringing a report back in 6 months, I'm assuming that it is. Yes, if that's satisfactory, yes, thank you. So don't want to be putting pressure on our officers if it's not possible. Councillor Farquhar, I was going to go to the vote. Do you want to speak on this item?
I do, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar.
I think it's a very good proposal.
Thank you.
One would suggest that perhaps it could be expanded a little bit, because obviously you indicated that there's an administration incoming. However, the work of the local authority, as we all know, continues regardless of the administration, regardless of politicians, because that's the nature of the local authority. So if I might suggest that for the proposal is that the chair of the licensing committee raises this concern in a formal letter to the directorate which is responsible for highways, and outlines the fact that we will be re-inspecting in 6 months as a way of encouragement to them to prioritise their resources to making sure that these works are completed, or to their best effort within the next 6 months.
Right, thank you for that. So, Councillor Brown, you might as well put in your 10 penneth, and then perhaps we can get
I mean,
one proposal. Wrap it up.
I sort of agree with that. I'd just like to add to the recommendation. Also, just obviously it lists on all of these matters, notified highways to address it, sits with highways, reported to highways to correct. Obviously, the highways team have big capital budgets and they know their staffing, and they'll know their budget for the next year and sort of going forward. I don't think it would be unreasonable to ask for a response from highways just to respond to regarding taxi ranks, what their schedule and programme of works is for these taxi ranks after what's been highlighted to them. They must have something that it must, because they schedule their works, they schedule their budgets and road maintenance and their line painting, etc., etc. So they must have something there. I can't imagine it would be a great amount of work if we just also had a recommendation to request highways to respond, giving a time scale or programme of works to carry this out.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to accept both Councillor Brown and Councillor Farquhar's suggestions. I certainly don't think it'll do any harm to write to the directorate,
Okay.
and I'm happy to take Councillor Brown's point and put that in to the recommendation as part of the letter.
Thank you very much. So we have something on the table then, it looks like we're all agreed with. I'll just go through it. Firstly, that the chair writes to highways and raises the issues as to the concerns that we have, and asks with regard to the schedule of works and how this is addressed. That we ask for a 6 month report to come back in 6 months time with regard to this as to the progress. And I think that covered it in its entirety, did it not? So if we have that as a proposal, we have Councillor Johnson's proposal, so seconded by Councillor Kelsey. Are we all in favour? Could I have a show of hands, please? Thank you, it's unanimous. Okay, so we have a way forward with regard to that. Thank you very much. So, gentlemen, okay, Councillor Brown, with the matters dealt with, what is it now?
There's another matter in the report regarding taxi ranks. If it's okay to bring up another.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Subject.
Yes, of course, we just went on one item. Yes, okay, fire
Yeah,
away.
paragraph 5, it talks about generally it was found that parking by non-licensed vehicles on ranks was an issue when witnessed by officers, or when complaints are sent to the taxi licensing team, and referrals made to parking enforcement for action. Now, I've had this brought up directly with me from constituents in my ward who are taxi drivers, and I've had pretty serious issues with not being able to get into ranks because other non-licensed vehicles are parked in those ranks, particularly around places like the Dolphin Shopping Centre. I know I've had incidents reported where people have used it to go into the shops, and then the taxi drivers can't get there, and actually it's led to altercations and issues. And I think parking enforcement on occasions have attended, but they're not really taking any action. And I just wondered whether we could make a recommendation that parking enforcement actually sort of prioritise issues around illegal parking on ranks, because it does it does disservice to the public who are needing to use those taxis, and it does cause particular issues for the taxi drivers who are paying, pay their fees to have licensed taxis and have, carriage licenses. So I think we need to do something around prioritising issues around illegal parking in taxi ranks.
Okay,
Whether that comes into the signage that was looked at, and I don't know what the law is around whether there's sort of fixed penalty notices for illegal parking in taxi ranks, whether we can install cameras at particular problem areas to highlight those vehicles and issue fixed penalty notices or something like that. But I think we need to do something to address the issue of non-licensed vehicles parking in ranks, causing difficulties for the taxi drivers and the public wanting to use those taxis.
Well, I think first we'll ask what is done at the moment. I think what is the process at the moment with regard to that form of prioritisation, if indeed it exists.
We have been liaising with parking enforcement as
Sorry,
well.
Judy, could you shout a bit?
We have been liaising with parking enforcement. We have had a parking enforcement officer come to the trade liaison meeting. These problems were highlighted to them, and we have asked them to, as they do their rounds, even the ranks that aren't particularly, in the centre of town, to look at them. They haven't come back to me as yet. I do keep giving them a nudge, should we say. It is a difficult one because obviously they need to catch them, the individuals, when they're actually on the ranks. I mean, and the ranks that we looked at, the signage was adequate to ensure that they know the public shouldn't be parking on them. It's not a matter of the ranks are in such a state that the signage is there and the public park on them at a regular all over the borough. And we do liaise, and I do inform parking enforcement of the problems, and I try to kind of keep it to specifics, the ones that are most problematic, because otherwise it would be quite a large list, if you see what I mean. But the ones that are most prominent, because the thought was that if we enforce on the prominent ones, then the message will get across.
Yeah, I think the question that's extremely useful. I think the question is, do we have the ability to, and I'm not entirely certain that we do we have the ability as an authority to prioritise specifically taxi ranks with regard to parking issues? Obviously, we're mindful of them, but what is our remit here?
I would need to speak to parking enforcement.
Yeah, I think that might be the way forward.
Again,
I think we could ask if we could ask our officer if you could refer back, please,
Certainly.
and then bring your responses back to us for
Certainly.
our next meeting.
No problem.
In the meantime, obviously, the work that you're doing in a sensitive way, taking it forward, because there's a lot of sensitivities that sit around that, obviously.
There are, yes.
You would continue with that.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you. Councillor Burton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't want to add more work to you.
Oh, don't worry about it.
I know
Another letter?
And yes, I was just going to say, I know you like writing letters.
Oh, do I?
Yeah, I would suggest that it might add a little more weight and urgency to the department if you was to write with our concerns. I do agree when Councillor Brown did beat me to this, because I was thinking exactly the same thing. I've heard the same issues with taxi ranks, and as a taxi driver, from there, what they see is they feel that they pay to be able to park there, and they shouldn't have to deal with members of the public who are being difficult. And it isn't, as you say, our licensing team that deal with it. It's the parking team. However, it's causing problems to our taxi drivers. So.
Yes, I would agree. I'm happy to highlight those difficulties and those issues, but we need to be careful of our remit. We are not able to enforce anything upon them, but we could certainly highlight it and say that it's obviously an issue. I'd be happy to so do that. Councillor Parkwell.
Thank you, Chair. What really concerned me was the anecdotal reports of alterations.
Where are these?
What's the correct term that you used there? Sorry for the officer. An alteration.
Altercation.
An altercation. Thank you very much. For an altercation happening at one of our taxi ranks, because the taxi rank is actually protected and sovereign.
It's Councillor Brown.
Oh, sorry. Well, there you go. I do apologise.
And as you say, anecdotal.
It is anecdotal, but perhaps it would add value if we could actually have a report for the number of PCNs which are actually issued on taxi ranks, and actually if there are any. because that may be another sort of implied spur to our parking enforcement teams to ensure that they're coming up to speed. Because the other thing which might be quite interesting is if the taxi trade themselves are actually reporting parking actually on taxi ranks, or if it's a case that they wait and then they move on and they don't think to actually report. So I think we don't really have a grasp of the exact details of how often this is happening or necessarily where it's happening, unless the officer has other details that actually have been provided by the taxi trade itself as regards the frequency and the locations of parking of non-licensed vehicles in taxi ranks.
Well, I think, I mean, rather than ask the officer to write a report, I can certainly raise that as a question in the letter, as the amount of PCNs there have been. And then that can come back to our next, rather than ask for a separate report for the officer, because they are extremely busy. But if you were so content, then I will write a letter as charged by my committee, asking with regard to the parking enforcement issues and that sit around the rank, and also to ask with regard to how many PCNs have been issued in the last year, in the last 6 months. What time period would you consider?
I would suggest the last year is sensible because the policy came into effect in 21. So
Okay,
I think
then.
last year is acceptable.
Okay, so we have another proposal. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Burton. So the proposal being then that the chair write to the Transportation Department with regard to parking enforcement and raise the issues that sit around the taxi ranks, and ask the question with regard to how many PCNs have been handed out in the last year, and as to their way forward with regard to this issue. Is everybody so content? Right, could I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. So that's unanimous. So are there any more questions with regard to this matter? Councillor Johnson, Councillor Brown?
Not a question so much. I just wanted a very brief comment that I just want to thank the local taxi trade actually, and highways and licensing officers for the provision of the taxi ranks. I travel around the country for work, and
is there a question,
I just want to say I never have a problem using taxis at taxi ranks in the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area. It's far better than many other places in the country.
Indeed, I agree.
I was recently stuck in Preston at the station. There were no taxis late in the evening. Had to get a bus halfway to my hotel and then walk through subways in the dark to get to a hotel because there were just no taxis around. I've had the same in Sutton Coldfield. I had the same in the Isle of Wight with just no taxis on the rank and very poor provision of taxis. So just wanted to thank the drivers and the licensing team for the fact that in this area we do have a good provision and a good use of ranks.
Indeed, we're all grateful for the taxi services that we all receive in BCP. So moving on then, if we're finished with this item, we have our two proposals which have been formally proposed, seconded and voted upon. So we'll move on then, if we may. Everybody content? Yes. To item 7. So this is a request for amendments of the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Vehicles Policy. Now the purpose of the report is to consider a request from the BCP Taxi and Private Hire Association to amend the current BCP Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Vehicle Policy 2021 with regard to the following: increasing the initial maximum licensable age of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles, which is currently 3.5 years, and delaying the date of all vehicles that must meet the Euro 6 emission standard, which is currently the 31st of December 2023. So again, we have our officers attending to support us, and that's Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Barlow and Mrs. Cole, our legal advisor. So I hope I'm right in this time in asking you to take us through the report. And then we have a letter, we all have a letter from the trade which outlines this, and I'll be inviting Mr. Lane to present his request to the committee. Mrs. Randall, thank you.
Thank you very much. So the report for you, as has been said, is a request that we received via the taxi trade, BCP Taxi and Private Hire.
Start again.
Start again. So sorry. So the matter before you is a request that we've received via our local taxi trade, BCP Taxi and Private Hire Association. The representative, David Lane, is here to discuss it in more detail. Councillor Butt has summarised it quite well, the two requests that have been made with regard to our wheelchair accessible vehicles and the non-wheelchair accessible vehicles, sort of merging those ages. and delaying the date for all vehicles to meet the Euro 6 standard. The policy that we're looking at to amend was introduced in 2021, and part of when we were considering that, we're considering the environmental impact of the vehicles within our area to support our climate change measures and the climate change emergency that had been declared by BCP at the time. So that needs to is something that members would need to consider when they're looking at any amendments to the policy. Basically, I will leave it to Mr. Lane to give you his recommendations and see whether that is something that members wish to support or not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'd like to request Mr. Lane, if you'd like to come forward and to put your request to the committee. Thank you. Don't forget to put your microphone on.
Would I?
And that's a very uncomfortable chair, but
You don't want us to sit it.
indeed.
Good morning.
Morning.
May I just say thank you for your discussions on the previous item. We found them quite helpful and supportive. This is our request to amend the vehicle age appropriate on first licensing of a vehicle. May I start this request by painting a picture of a vehicle owner who back in 2018 decided it was time to update their vehicle, and after considering what was available chose to buy a high quality, low mileage 2015 car. This decision was made in accordance with the policies then in place, which meant that they could use the vehicle until 2030. He was confident of being able to meet these financial commitments and be able to budget to replace it in the late 2020s. The situation was changed by the implementation of the new BCP policies, which meant that the vehicle would be licensed for the last time during 2023 and have to be replaced about 6 years earlier than previously budgeted for. This obviously presented him with some problems, but he was again confident of overcoming these difficulties. However, like almost everybody else, he was then faced with the effects of COVID-19, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the cost of living crisis. As a result of these events, he is now faced with the real prospect of not being able to finance a replacement vehicle that meets the demands of the current BCP policy, and therefore having to leave the trade. It is because of instances such as this that we request an amendment to the policy with regard to the age of vehicles when first licensed. At an earlier meeting between our association and the licensing team, the desire to extend this to 6 years was expressed. Having further reflected upon this, we now seek support in one or more of the following ways. An increase to match that recently agreed for wheelchair accessible vehicles, i.e. a maximum age of 4.5 years as opposed to 3.5 years, with an appropriate maximum mileage restriction. People will know that the cost of second-hand vehicles has increased, and a lot of 3-year-old vehicles are fleet vehicles which are automatically replaced at the age of 3. By the time they get onto the market, and most of these vehicles are in very good condition, they're too close to the 3.5-year standard to be appropriate to go forward with purchase and license. Alternatively, a change to the date after which only Euro 6 vehicles will be relicensed to say the 31st of August 2025, which is the 10th anniversary of the introduction of the standard. The benefit of agreeing this last suggestion would be that it could be enhanced to set 10 years as a standard for when the introduction of new emission standards introduced by the government have to be applied in future. So the 2030 change to electric vehicles would mean all vehicles on the BCP fleet have to be electric by 2040. But it would be in the policy now so that people aren't faced with a decision 5 years from the time. Or aligning the dates for Euro 6 and the new BCP livery to the 31st of December 2024, as has previously been recommended by the licensing manager at one of these meetings. Any support you can give would be much appreciated by the relevant members of our trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. So what I'm going to do first is we've got some specifics here. I'm going to look for some advice to sit around them with regard to the policy that we have in train and with regard to some legalities that sit around the Euro 6 emissions, etc., etc. Could I ask you, Mrs. Randall, if you could comment, please, on these matters? The aspect of, with regard to the Euro 6 emissions especially, and as to whether that is possible or not. It was iterated that you had made some mention at a meeting that that was possible. I don't recall that myself.
I think what Mr. Lane is referring to is the report that came to the March 22 Licensing Committee, which looked at various, it was a review of the licensing policy that we had agreed. And at that time, the trade had requested, so it wasn't a recommendation, it was the feedback from the trade, had highlighted some confusion and inconsistency with the compliance dates. And they had asked for this amendment back then with regard to the Euro 6. And in the reference, in the minutes to that meeting, paragraph 9.5, it did state that the committee did not agree with the request at that time, that they be put back. They appreciate the costs, but they agreed that this needed to be progressed with the published timescales at that time. So it was part of a committee meeting report, just as this one, that the trade had requested at the time when we were looking at all of the feedback from the new policy implementation then.
I do remember it being thought of a retrograde step because of the climate change agenda, and we needed to keep on top of that.
So obviously the trade have requested that again. It is within the gift of the members. It's part of our policy. So as I say, I leave that to members to decide.
All right, thank you. So then, members, the three items which we're considering now, we seek the views and consensus, we hope, to either agree the amendments to the policies requested, or make additional amendments to the policies presented, or make no changes and leave the policy as published, or any of what becomes between the three of them. So we can have anything that we so wish in there. So, members, any questions, please? Floor's open. Councillor Farquhar?
Yes, I'll open the batting. I agree with yourself, Chair, and with the officer, is that this was a not necessarily contentious issue, but essentially it was for our commitment to be zero emissions.
Indeed.
And in line with our climate and ecological emergency. What I found interesting from Mr. Lane's presentation was the trade looking to fleet vehicles that are normally replaced at the 3-year mark, and that our policy has been agreed with the trade at 3.5 years old for the Euro 6 emission. Perhaps somebody here could remind me as regards if there was a discussion around fleet vehicles coming onto the market for trade members to actually purchase, and why there was a delay between them coming onto the market and them being purchased and then registered first license at 3.5 years old. The key here is that it's at first license. So on the face of it, when looking at it, then it seems perfectly reasonable for it to be 3.5 years old and to meet Euro 6 emission standards at 3.5 years at first license. I don't really understand the lived experience on Mr. Lane's discussion about so on and so forth for the vehicle, because my interpretation is that first license is when that vehicle gets first license as a licensed vehicle. Obviously, and then there's renewals at appropriate stages, and there's MOT tests and a variety of other requirements. So I think that to my mind, at this precise moment in time, is that 7.5, as it stands, at first license of no more than 3.5 years old, is valid to take advantage of ex-fleet vehicles from other organisations being purchased and to be licensed for the first time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parker. Did you want to make any comment or any points of clarification of fact there for Councillor Parker? Mr. Randall?
All I can say is previously 3.5 years has been in former experience,
Yep.
and over the last few years for this. I'm not aware that there was a problem getting them through to be licensed for first license. I thought the request was because they're holding their value, and therefore we want that request to be at 4.5 years at first license.
Yes, I think that's the nub of it. It's perhaps not clear in its application, but the nub of it is to not be at 3.5 years, but to be at 4.5, as our WABs are. So it's to bring a... Councillor Kelsey?
I see no reason to change it, Chairperson. It worked perfectly well in Bournemouth days at 3.5 years. It's worked perfectly well for up to now, as far as I can see. What I would like to ask is, what is the maximum mileage?
Yes, that is much more important. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
For 3.5 years?
Yeah.
No, we don't. It was, if it's older, then, as Mr. Lane said, he would then propose a maximum mileage as well. If they're older, yeah.
And then you, Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. I think one thing to point out here is that some members who are here were present at a wheelchair accessible vehicle working group recently, where we were looking at trying to make things slightly more attractive for taxi drivers in the trade to possess wheelchair accessible vehicles. Given the struggles that we've had, members will remember that when we put in place the BCP policy, we removed the cap gradually over that 5-year period in the life of the policy to try, but it was only 15 wheelchair accessible vehicle licenses per year until the end of that policy. And as of, at the moment, was it 2 have actually been taken in the years since? So clearly we still have a problem with getting these WAVs onto the ranks. And to match the ages at first license removes any incentive that's already there. And I think it would be a detriment. I think it'd be a detrimental step. And I certainly don't want to see the Euro 6 deadline moved back any further. I just think that it'd be a really retrograde step for a council trying to be at the forefront of the climate change agenda. So I just don't see how we can change this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor John.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree about the Euro 6. I think it's something that we are all concerned that we maintain. The 3.5 years bit, I'm thinking similar way to Councillor Kelsey here, that it's actually not the age that's the important thing here, isn't it? It's actually the number of miles a vehicle has driven. Can I ask that the 3.5 years?
Sorry, Councillor, I'm having difficulties hearing someone. Could you get a bit closer?
Okay, I'll turn up the volume slightly as well, Chair. The 3.5 year number from Bournemouth, I believe. Can I ask for how many years has that been in place as 3.5 years? Well, what I'm thinking is, of course, is cars have moved on over the last several years. I would personally, I think that the number of miles is the important thing.
Yeah.
So you know, if anything was to happen, to take the 3.5 years out and have a maximum number of mileage rather than a maximum age of the vehicle, or somewhere between, it would be my thought.
Okay. Well,
I know that's quite a complication, but.
You know, the 3.5 years was put in, gosh, donkeys years ago, before my time with licensing. And when we were developing this policy, we did have conversations, and it was sort of trying to work out what limit did we want to put on vehicles coming onto the fleet, bearing in mind once they're on our fleet, they're on there for however long, and the use and the mileage is very high. I think I know we've had conversations about the quality of vehicles, the make of vehicles. It is much better these days. I mean, it's something that I certainly think can be considered. I know Department of Transport guidance consultation that took place last year with regard to vehicles and licensing was looking at making recommendations of having no age restrictions, either upper or lower. So it's something to consider. But I think, from licensing point of view for members, our priority is making sure that the vehicles that are coming onto the fleet are fit for purpose, they're safe, and they will be safe for the license period. And we don't really want old bangers coming on straight away, which are then going to have to be replaced, quicker, and there's more enforcement around that aspect as well. But I certainly think that with the trade's input, we could come up with some mileage limitations potentially. I don't know whether David would want to sort of jump in there at all. But I think if we are looking at it for non-WAV vehicles, could I suggest that you're also looking at it for WAV vehicles as well? Because there's an age restriction there, and we have got a difficulty in getting them. And if we are thinking about removing an minimum age limit for them, we need to think about all of the vehicles that we license. And then we need to also consider that currently within the policy there is an upper age limit. So are you going to then review that? Because there's no point in having, we'd be in the similar situation as David is saying, people would be like.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what Nananka was saying now, I was just about to bring up exactly the same things about our upper age limits. I mean, my car's 22 years old and it's only got 100,000 miles on the clock and it still looks brand new. There is no need, I don't think, to put a maximum amount of mileage on a car because, you might just change the engine in the car. The car bodywork inside is perfectly all right, but the engine might need changing, and that's not a major problem. I think, if I may, Chair, I may suggest that we adjourn this, not adjourn it, but defer any decisions on this today for a fuller report to come to us where we can talk to the trade properly and get some updated information on ages of vehicles, mileages of vehicles, etc. I think it is something we need to do. We're going down the road of more and more electric vehicles now, and I think the whole remit on types of vehicles that we have on our ranks and that the drivers are using now needs to be relooked at.
Thank you very much. Are you happy to second my proposal?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the trouble we've got here is that with one thing changing, we've got to then change a lot of the other things to make it work. And I'm certainly not prepared. I don't think we can do that on a whim here today. And I don't think that making a decision and allowing these changes today will have enough of a benefit to survive the knock-on effects that it will have regarding our policy. A lot of the talk that we have around numbers and limits that we put on cars are fairly arbitrary, really, because as a former student, I've seen some cars that would probably meet the mileage and tests for first licensing, but within 6 months would die because their clutch has been stepped on so many times. So it's all a bit arbitrary. Whereas, of course, you have a very careful driver over here in terms of Councillor Gussie, and his 22-year-old car is fine. So it's all a bit arbitrary, and it certainly needs a lot more thought than a change here on a whim. So I think we come back to this with a much more full report and wider scope.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to say a few words, and then I'll go to Councillor Farquhar and Councillor Burton. Thank you.
Yeah, what we've just also got to consider, if you're going to make substantial changes to a policy, we should really go back out to consultation.
Yep.
You can make minor tweaks as a committee, and I'm a little bit on the fence with this because if the changes you were deciding on were advantageous to the trade, there's less need possibility to go out to that full consultation. But if we're going to even go wider than that, and you mentioned electric cars, etc., is probably something I would suggest goes out to consultation again.
Yes, that we understood that. Thank you for reminding us.
Yes, indeed. It's an interesting debate, and I particularly want to pick up and highlight on Councillor Johnson's suggestion that our incentivisation for WAV vehicles, wheelchair accessible vehicles, is failing because only 2 registered out of 15 that was possible in a year does show that the incentivisation of allowing an extra year to 4.5 years doesn't seem to be provisioning for wheelchair accessible vehicles. To me, that very good point raised by Councillor Johnson reinforces the fact that it should not change. If anything, then perhaps the WAV vehicles needs to add an extra year to encourage and incentivise the wheelchair accessible vehicles, so that the trade actually take them up and the decisions are made instead of 4.5 years, perhaps move it up to 5 or 5.5. Because this has been a concern of mine throughout, and I'm so pleased that there was a subcommittee to actually discuss this, or a panel to discuss this, because we have to have a provision for wheelchair accessible vehicles. It is not acceptable for a local authority to not be able to provision for people to be able to travel by taxi. That's my only point, is that I wouldn't accept or support a 3.5 year increase because the 4.5 for WAVs is not working.
And those are the types of conversations that we can have with regard to any review. Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Good point. Councillor Burton. I'm so sorry, Councillor Brown. I do apologise.
That's right.
Councillor Brown.
We've only known each other 16 years.
Bless you.
Yeah, I think the discussion around the 3.5 years request, I think, is quite interesting. I don't have a sort of strong view either way around that.
Can you speak up again, because it's me, but I'm finding it difficult to hear.
Just on the Euro 6 change, I mean, I can see the request from the trade having some logic in terms of extending it to 31st December 2024 in line with the delivery change, because if you're having to change your vehicle to comply with these sort of Euro 6 emissions requirement by the end of 2023, but then there's the delivery change coming in 2024. So sort of multiple changes when you probably want to sort of get on and do it all in one. So I can see there's some logic to that. And also it's difficult to know without sort of figures in front of us to know how much of the fleet does this affect in terms of not being compliant with Euro 6 emissions. You know, is it 10% of the current taxi fleet, or is it 50, 60, 70% of the fleet? How many are we talking about that this is going to impact on? So what's the scale of the issue here, particularly in terms of our climate commitments and emissions? You know, if it's only 10% of the fleet, then it's not a significant issue. Particularly when you take into account emissions around sort of replacing vehicles as well. You know, it's not just the emissions the vehicle puts out during its lifetime; it's also the demand for new vehicles as well that's created. So yeah, I'd like to see more information around the sort of the fleet and the compliance with Euro 6 emissions.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to all of this, I think that what the committee are thinking here is that the changes here are not what we'd be looking for to solve the issue. And rather than a deferral, I think it would be more helpful for the tax trade, even if they don't like the answer, to give them a firm answer here to this request, but make sure that we give it a fuller review, because clearly it's not, the policy hasn't quite taken in as we'd want it to. And given the fact that, as Linda says, we need to take it out to a much wider sort of consultation should we decide to make those changes. But I think that for today, the trade need an answer, and I don't see that there's enough here to accept the changes, and I would suggest that we leave the policy as published for now.
Thank you. With a view to a further review, because it's been raised and it is important, and we do want to make sure that these things are addressed. Trudy, you want to come in?
In answer to Councillor Brown's question about how many, basically at the moment there is 30% of the fleet do not comply with Euro 6, which is 304 at the moment.
Okay, so that's a useful number. So then, members.
Sorry, can we just also clarify the livery issue?
Yes, carry on.
Because when a vehicle is changed and comes onto the fleet, it has to comply with the new livery at that point. So it's not a case of a vehicle coming on now to meet Euro 6 would then have to do the livery. It's only vehicles that were licensed pre this policy that were already Euro 6 compliant then have to do the livery. So there won't be a great deal. So all of the new and the replaced vehicles that are coming onto the fleet during the life of this policy, you will see them. They're all driving around with the new livery on.
And we must remember, of course, that we've gone into great detail with regard to this over the last 3 years to ensure that all these things with regard to our new, I mean, a lot of you would have been here and we've had our working parties, that the new livery was supported by the trade, etc., etc. Everybody was so happy with that. We've been very careful. So it's not something which is being imposed. So I think, Councillor Farquhar, if you'd like to speak, and then I will move to the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Could the officer just repeat not the percentage, but the actual number of vehicles that are not Euro 6 compliant?
I'm sure she will if she knows them, yes.
It is 304 at the moment, and the fleet is currently 938. So obviously the 30% was a rough.
Okay. Right, useful. Okay then, so did you want to say anything? No, you just need a second. Yeah, okay. So may I please, Councillor Burton, then I'm going to move the proposal and ask for a second.
A very, very quick point.
Of course.
Chair. It's just, I mean, I do also get the feeling that is more complicated. These things always are, aren't they? And giving some clarity to the trade is important. However, I'm very keen that it's not a long timescale for this because the trade have. So do we have any indication about how the timescale for this would be?
Well, it may be that we could move to, it may be, I'll ask, but it may be that we can move to review this with the new administration. I think that would be in keeping, but I will ask if that's feasible.
Well, there are kind of two elements to this. I know they're interlinked, but obviously there's a Euro 6 element and then there's the age element. So the age element could move, or obviously will need to move to the new
I think what we're saying is that we've got a proposal that it stays as it is at the moment. I'm very keen that it stays as it is with regard to Euro 6. Yeah. I have no compunction with that. And I think we've heard from the floor that nobody wants to touch the Euro 6.
Okay.
But the other matter with the age and the suggestion of mileage and all those other contributions that have been made, that's something which could come within a full review. But I think it's quite right, the taxi trade deserve an answer today. And the answer, I think, the proposal we have on the floor is we're not going to make any changes. We're going to leave the policy as published with an undertaking to review with regard to those elements of the policy which they brought forward today. Okay. I think that's the way forward. Is everybody so content with that? So that's my proposal. I have Councillor Johnson seconding. Could I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming along, Mr. Lane. Halfway there, I think, halfway there. Very much aware of your needs, so you're certainly not being ignored, and we will bring those forward for a review to see if we can make the changes that you so wish, but under a full discussion, obviously, with all the information in front of us. Okay, so thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you for the decision. I am concerned that there will be a reduction in the size of the fleet.
Well, you'll have an opportunity, obviously, when we go to the consultation to make all those representations, and we look forward to them because they're always very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Okay.
We will seek
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. To the fullest extent. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you. So now we look to our forward plan, which is item 8. So we've dealt with today with our provision and positioning of taxi ranks. We've had that report. We've had the request from the trade. We have an unmet needs survey was to come today, but it's now been deferred to the 24th of March. So of course this is after the lifetime of this May, not March. Thank you, darling. This is after the lifetime of this administration. So obviously we can't fetter the discretion of any new administration, but it would be hoped that the forward plan would be in train. So we have item 4, wheelchair accessibility vehicles. That's to come forward on the 24th of May. The review of pricing mechanism for licensing vehicles. Is that standard or is that an extra? Mrs. Randall? Is that standard or is that a request? It is a request from the committee asking if the mechanism can be addressed. So it's a request of this committee to bring that forward. And that's also on the 24th of May.
That was raised, I think, when we had our carriage review.
Indeed.
Last
Indeed.
time, members asked whether it's something we would want to proactively do rather than wait for the trade to put in a request.
So we'll take that forward then and we'll have a full report with regard to that. So those are the 2 items. So as usual, any items that you'd like considered, please do let Mrs. Randall have them, and she will obviously bring them to the chair and vice chair, and we will obviously decide as to whether those are feasible or not, and whether we can bring them onto the forward plan based on obviously officers' time constraints and advice. So with that said then, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Councillor Burton, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just looking at the forward plan, obviously I know it's difficult because there's a new administration may come in May, and so obviously we're looking at the sort of meeting on the 24th of May. Just to sort of pick up sort of the elephant in the room, just about the sexual entertainment venue policy, because of the
Okay, I'll
sort
stop
of
you there.
changes. Just whether that's going to be on a future agenda.
I'll stop you there. Yeah, I'm quite happy to defer to our legal advisor and also to our manager with regard to how that has been dealt with and the legal advice that we've received, so that we can in fact put that to bed. Thank you. Who would like to speak first? Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Cole, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes, Councillor Brown. So yes, it probably is the elephant in the room, but we know the outcome of the judicial review. The policy has been quashed on judicial review, which basically means we have no policy. So at the moment, we're in a bit of a limbo stage. Applications can be made. Anybody can make an application for a new, they can make an application for a new premises, and we will just deal with that quite correctly, just based on the legislation. And that's how we'll continue. A decision does have to be made as to whether we're going to go forward and produce a new policy. We think, again, that's a decision for the new administration. It's quite a political decision, it's quite an emotive decision. It's not something that I think is appropriate for us to pick up in the last couple of months of this licensing committee. So that is the plan. So at the moment we'll just we'll take applications on a case-by-case basis, deal with them in accordance with the legislation, and come May, and when we have a new committee, I don't know what we're going to have, new CMB, new cabinet, a decision will have to be made higher up there as how we want to go forward. I mean, our suggestion is maybe it's something that has to be thought about higher than licensing committee in the first instance, and then if the direction comes down that licensing committee think about a policy, we'll start again. So.
Indeed, it's very much on the agenda. Mrs. Randall, do you want to add to that?
I think, like Linda, I would reiterate that, you know, I think it is a decision that will be put in on the forward plan as we move forward. It just wasn't appropriate to really go through it now.
Indeed. So we can add that to the forward plan, because obviously this is a quasi-judicial committee and it must not be politicised. and it's a very, very sensitive time.
Yeah.
So nobody in this room would want to do that, I'm sure.
We
So
don't know what the plan is. That's
yeah.
why it's not on the forward
Yeah.
plan. So
we can pencil that in, I think, and find a suitable date where we can visit that again. So if our number is sat around the table after May 4th, then indeed we'll be able to consider that. So that said, Councillor Farquhar, and then I'm going to close.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted a bit of clarification from Mrs. Cole. The reason for that is because the applications are on a case-by-case basis. There is an application for a renewal for one of our SEVs, whereby representations are requested by the 22nd of March for the closing date. I'm a bit confused if we don't have a policy, how it is that the renewal will actually be judged, particularly in respect to acquired rights, which our previous policy addressed at some degree of length. So perhaps the legal officer could expand a little for our viewing public as regards what representations can be made for a renewal or a new application, particularly in regard to the fact that there is one in train at the moment for a renewal, whereby representations have to be renewed or be received by the 22nd of March.
Yes. Thank you. I think that our legal advisor did expand on that, and she did actually explain that we would go to the legislation. But Mrs. Cole, if you would like to repeat that.
Yeah, try and explain in a bit better way. So an application for a sex shop or a sexual entertainment venue, I mean, they are legal entities. The law allows these type of premises, and so it is an option for any local authority to have a policy. Now, the benefit of having a policy is you can be a little bit tighter. You can set out in your policy what a local authority wants, and that's the process we went through as a local authority, and the policy was made. If we haven't got a policy, we just literally look strictly at the legislation, and the legislation is set out in Schedule 3, Miscellaneous Provisions Act, that you have to just consider things like, I think, well, age, criminal convictions, of who the applicant is, but the only key thing really is location. That is so. Any applications that are made now, we can, if objections are made on location, that can be considered, and it's quite right. But what we as a local authority have got to look at is, well, we issued a licence last year in the same location. So if locations have changed, then it might be right. There might be issues there that the licensing committee then, or the subcommittee that deals with it, can consider. But anybody can make a rep based on what's set out in the legislation. The decision will come to, if there's any reps made, the decision will come to a subcommittee. We've already made a decision with the monitoring officer that it's not appropriate for this matter to be considered by a licensing subcommittee during the pre-election period, because, as you said, reps can be made up to, I think, did you say the 22nd of March?
Yeah, it mustn't be legislated.
So we're straight into pre-election time. So any person that's made an application for sex establishment venue licence, it will just continue as long as that application has been made before the current licence expires, which this one has. It will just continue until the licence is until the application is determined. And again, really, we think it's better that, well, we shouldn't. The advice is we don't get into such discussions in the pre-election time. I mean, I don't even think, if there were no objections, I don't even think the licensing officers are going to make that decision and grant that new license. It's just going to wait in abeyance until, well, what will be, I'm sure, going to be late May, June time, whenever it can be scheduled for a committee hearing, if that's what's required.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. So I think that boils down to we have statutory provision and we'll be using it.
Absolutely. And if I may, Chair, where is that statutory provision actually published for the public if they wish to make a representation?
Well, it's on
in the Act.
Well, it's in the Act, but
if I may clarify, Chair, where is it actually clarified on the actual BCP websites?
Okay, Mrs. Cole.
I'm sure sorry, let me just ask the licensing officer, will it be on the report?
On the report.
Oh, no, we haven't got, sorry, we haven't got
So,
that far.
so our website shows the applications.
Yeah.
So it says Wiggle has made an application, and if anyone wishes to make an objection, they can write in. They write in, and the licensing officer would then mediate with that person to make sure that the objection meets the legislative framework, and if it doesn't, the licensing officer would give support to whoever to make sure that their rep meets the necessary criteria, and they would direct them to the legislation, which is the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, Schedule 3, Section 12, I believe.
It is, as the officer said before, it's done on a case-by-case basis, so that
there is
that
only
reference
very
is given at source.
specific grounds for refusal. As Mrs. Cole has pointed out, the grounds without a policy are the character of the relevant locality, the use of which is within the vicinity, yes, and the layout of the premises.
Thank you very much. Okay then, so it just leaves to me then to say a thank you very much to all the members and those who aren't present here today for all their hard work over the last, I don't know how many years it is now, but it is quite a few. And to thank you, and of course the officers, for all their hard work and for always supporting us, and especially to our clerk, Jill, and all our clerks. So thank you very much to everybody. I don't know how many of us will be sitting around the table in a month or two, but I wish you all good luck, and thank you very much for all your contributions to this committee. Thank you, and I will.